In this video, I'm going to show you how to deploy a application in GitLab to Google Compute Engine. And we're going to continue along with the application that we created in the previous video. The first thing we're going to do is we need a way, we're going to work on the application in the Google Cloud Shell, and we need a way to push those changes to the GitLab repository. So the first thing we're going to do is set up an SSH key for GitLab in the Google Cloud Shell environment. So I'm going to open up the Google Cloud Shell. I'll just pop this out into its own tab. And the first thing we're going to need to do is generate a key. I already have one, but the command that you would use is this. So SSH keygen, the type of key, and a comment for the key. And so you would just put your email address in here. So your email at host.com, or sorry, your email at host.com. So put your email address in there. Again, I'm not going to do it because I've already generated one that I am using, but you would enter that command and it's going to go ahead and generate the key. It's going to ask you for a passphrase. You can leave it blank. That's no problem. And then the next thing you're going to do is display the generated public key. So we're going to do a cat. It's in the ssh.ssh folder. It's ID, ed25519, and the public key. And so there is a value that you can select and copy to your clipboard. And then the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go into my GitLab account. I'm already signed in. I'm going to go to my profile settings and I'm going to go to the page for SSH keys. And what I can do, I've already got this key here, but what you would normally do is paste in the contents of your public key folder and click on the button to add the key. Again, I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it here, but that's what you would do. And that's what's going to allow you to push changes that you've made in Google Cloud Shell into the repository. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Cloud Shell environment. I am going to open up the editor. And the first thing I am going to do, so here is the application that we developed in the last video. The first thing I'm going to do is create a shell script that we are going to use to update and deploy the running application. So I'm going to make a new file at the top level of the application folder. I'm going to call it deploy.sh. And in that folder, we are going to place this script. And I'll just explain what's going on in this script. So it's the shell script. The first thing we're going to do is go to the home directory. We are going to get a copy of the GitLab archive for this project. And so we're going to use the GitLab API for that. So we're going to use the project's repository archive path. And we have to identify the project by ID. So this shell script takes 3 parameters, 1, 2, and 3. The first one is the GitLab project ID. The second one is the private token. So our GitLab project is going to be a private project. So in order to be able to access it externally, we have to demonstrate that we have the required access. So in this case, we're going to use a private token. And then the third parameter is the project slug. So this is my app. So that is going to be the project slub. So it's going to be myapp.tar.gz. So 3 parameters to this script. So we download the repository archive, then we extract it, and then what we have in this home directory is we're gonna have 2 folders. We're gonna have the myapp folder, which is going to contain the running application. After we extract the project archive, it's all the application, or the updated project application, is going to be placed in a folder. I think it's going to be myapp master, and then some identifier identifying the commit, the last commit for the archive. So it has a folder with that name, and we're just going to copy all the files from that folder into the deployed production application folder. And that's just going to be identified by the project slug. And then we are going to tidy up. We're going to remove the archive. We're going to remove that temporary directory. Then we are going to go into the production application directory, so same as the slug, so cd $3. We're going to rerun npm install in case the updated application has any new dependencies. And then we're going to use the process manager PM2 to reload the application. So that's going to be the deployment script. So this script is going to be triggered every time there is a push to the GitLab repository. So what's going to happen is we're going to use webhooks. We're going to push our changes to the GitLab repository. That is going to trigger a webhook, which is going to then trigger this shell script, which downloads the updated code, extracts it, copies it over, and restarts the application. So that's the purpose of this deploy script. The other thing we're going to need to do is make sure that this script has the execution bit set. So I'm just going to change to the my app folder, do an ls-l. So there it is, deploy.sh. I'm going to do a change mod ch mod plus x, which is the execution bit, and then deploy.sh. If I do an ls-l again, you can see that this script has the execution bit set. Okay. The next thing we need to do is create a view for the actual webhook. So in the views folder, I am going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it webhook.ejs. And I will place the contents of the file. Not particularly exciting. I mean, this basically looks the same as the index page. There's just a little note here that this is the webhook page. Not totally important what's contained within this file. It's not really going to be seen by anyone, but the webhook integration does need a successful document to come back when the webhook gets invoked. So that's what we are going to use for that. Now we will add a root for the webhook. So in the roots folder, we're going to add a new file, and we're going to call it webhook.js. And we'll paste the contents of that file. Okay, quite a bit going on here. I'll just explain briefly what's going on. So this is an express router like any other. So we require express. we make a router object, and this one is going to handle the post request, so router.post, and there's the callback function. And the first thing it's going to do is just log the contents of the request body. That's just for documentation purposes. And then what we need to do is, so this is the webhook that is going to trigger the updating of the application. And one thing we want to do is we don't want just anybody posting to this path. We really want to make sure it's only GitLab posting to this path. We don't want anybody kind of manually refreshing the application. We only want the application updated if that is triggered by GitLab. And this is going to be a public website, so technically anybody could post to this path. So what we are going to do is require the xGitLab token header in the request, and we're going to have to require that it match the webhook token environment variable that we've defined in our environment. That's really what's going to guard this code from executing. It's only going to execute if the request has been triggered from GitLab and GitLab has been able to supply the correct value for xGitLab token. So if that test passes, then we are going to update the application. We are going to get the project ID, so that comes in the request body. So there is a project property. It has an ID subproperty, so that is going to be our project ID. And we need to know what the project slug is. So the project property also has a path with namespace property, which has the GitLab username and the project name separated with a slash. And so we will break that up into an array, and the project slug is the second part of that, so path parts 1. So that will give us the slug that we can use for the project. And then we have to know where the deploy script is, and we know we can get the home environment variable for the home directory for this user. We're going to tack on the project slug, and then we are going to tack on the path to the deploy script, so deploy sh. And then once we have all this information, we are going to create a sub process to download and download and restart the application. So essentially, we are going to execute this script in a sub process. So we use the child process module in Node, and we get the spawn function from that module. So here we are extracting the spawn function from the child process module. And then we invoke that function, so we're going to spawn a new process. It's going to execute the deploy script. These are the arguments, the project ID. We're going to get the GitLab private token from the environment variable, and the project slug, which we've just worked out. And we want this this sub process to run detached, so separate from the Node web server. So we set these other properties detached true, and we don't really care about any of the input or the output that process generates. So we do this stdio ignore, and so that's going to set up a sub process. So that is an object. We're going to call the unref method on that sub process, and that basically really ends up disconnecting that sub process from this this Node web server so that it can run independently. And the other case is somebody does a post request without the proper value for xGitLab token, in which case we're going to display a forbidden message. So we'll put some error message out there and throw a forbidden error. So we're going to either do one of those two things: run the deploy script in a subprocess, or return an error message. And then if that all works out, we will render the webhook view. So a lot going on in there, but the purpose of this hook is when it's triggered to run the deploy script in a sub process. Okay. And we are going to need to link this router into the application. So I'm going to open up app.js. I am going to bring the webhook router in. So we'll call it webhook router. Comes from roots webhook. And we will add the use the use method to link that path to that router. So app use webhook. And that's it. Okay. So that's all the changes we have to make to the application. The next thing we are going to do is create a GitLab project for this application. So I'm going to close these files. And at the top level, I'm going to make a git ignore file, .git ignore. And I am going to ignore the node modules directory. So we don't want the node modules directory to become part of the project. So we place that in our git ignore file. Okay, that's that. And now we want to set up a GitLab project. So I'm going to go back to my GitLab tab. I'm going to go to my projects. I'm going to make a new project and a blank one. And this is going to be my app. And it can be private. We're not going to initialize it with any files. And then we'll click on create the project. And there it is. And then we are going to follow the instructions to push an existing folder. So we already have the application in the Google Cloud Shell environment. We've now got the project in GitLab, and so we're going to follow the instructions to push an existing folder. So let's go to our environment and bring up the shell. I am in the correct project directory, and so we'll do a git init. And what's the next thing? We add the remote origin. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. And then the next step is to add, well, if I do a git status, we can see there's all these untracked files. So I'm going to do a git add dot and a git status. So now everything is tracked. They need to be committed. So we can do a git commit -m. This is the initial commit. And if we do a git status now, everything's committed. The final step for a new project from a new folder is to do the push operation, and we have to identify the origin and the branch. So git push -u origin master. So we'll paste that in there. And everything goes. If I go back to my GitLab page and I refresh the project, if everything is working, I should see all the files from the project. So that completes that step. Now, the next thing we want to do is, in the future, we want pushes to this repository to automatically deploy the application. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the project settings page, and I am going to go to the Webhooks page. And now we have to identify the URL to notify when there is a push to this repository. So I'm going to go back to my Google Cloud Platform page, and I am going to look at my instances, VM instances, and I still have my application running. There is the external IP address. I'm just going to paste that in and confirm that that's still working. So there it is. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to the Webhooks settings page for the project. I'm going to paste that in. And so it's HTTP, the IP address of the virtual machine on port 8080, and I'm going to add in the webhook path. So this is the path that's going to be notified when there is a push to the application. The other thing I'm going to do is set a secret token. And this can be any random sequence of letters and numbers. Doesn't really matter. You might want to choose something more secure than that. And I want this webhook to be triggered on a push event. So any push event in this case, we'll just keep it simple. And I don't want to enable SSL verification because in this case, it is just an HTTP web server. There's no HTTPS. There's no certificate to verify. So we'll disable that. So we set the URL, the secret token, to be triggered on push events and no SSL verification. And then we will add this webhook. And that is done. The second thing we are going to need, remember in that deploy script, it fetched the archive for the repository. This is a private repository, and so we're going to need an access token for that. So what I'm going to do is to go to my profile settings, and under access tokens, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call this one, well, I've already got one. You call it deploy. I'm going to call this deploy 3. But you can call yours deploy. And what I need is to indicate that I want to be able to, with this token, to be able to access the read API and the read repository, and to create this personal access token. So there's the token. I am going to make a copy of this because I'm going to need it later. So make sure you don't lose that. And what's the next step? Okay. And then the next step is to deploy the application. We're going to have to deploy it once by hand. So we're going to have to deploy this application manually the first time just to get things going. And then after that, once everything is set up, we'll be able to just push to the repository and have it automatically deployed. So I'm going to go back to my Google Cloud Shell here. I'm going to SSH into the virtual machine. So Hopefully I have a command for that not too far back in the history. There we are. And right now, all I have is this the single application folder. So that is the running application folder. In order to fetch the project archive, we're going to use the wget command. That's not installed by default on Debian. So I'm going to do a sudo apt install wget. And we will install that application. And then what I'm going to do is manually fetch the repository archive using wget. So I'm going to enter the command for that. And so there it is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to fetch the repository archive -o. The output is going to go into myapp.tar.gz. This is the API call for that. And we are going to have to put in the project ID and the access token. So I am going to, let's change the access token first. So I'm going to grab that from where I copied it earlier. So there's the access token, and I also need to fix up the project ID. This is the numeric Git Lab Project ID. You can get it if you go to, let me go to my projects and the My App project. The project ID is right here, just under the project name. You'll see there's a space for the project ID, so it's that numeric ID that we want. So I'll copy that and paste that in, and that should be it. So we're going to get the repository archive, output it into myapp.tar.gz. There's the project ID. There is the private token. And if I've done everything correctly, we should fetch the archive. So now if I do an ls-l, we have the project archive. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is unpack that archive. So tar zxf and myapp.tar.gz. So now we have that folder with the project slug, so myapp -master, and then the commit reference for the last commit to the project. And the next thing we're going to do is, if I do a PM2 status, okay, so this is the previous deployment of the application as we completed it in the last lab exercise. What we're going to do here is we need to restart this, but with the correct environment variables set. So this is all going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this application and delete it from the process manager control, and then restart it with the correct settings. So I'm going to do a PM2 stop www. And we'll delete it, PM2 delete www. Okay, so now the process manager isn't managing any applications. What I want to do is copy the latest version of the app, so from my app master and then the commit ID, into the production folder. So the command for that is going to look like this. So we're going to copy recursively all the files from the latest version into the production folder. And then what I'm going to do is change to the application bin directory in the production folder. So I'm going to cd myapp bin. And then I'm going to restart the application, but I need to set the correct environment variables. And so I will grab that command here. And paste that in. And so actually a couple things. I do not need the GitLab private token anymore. That is no longer required. But what I do need is, oh yes, sorry, I do need, my mistake here. I do need, let me paste this again. I do need both of those things, so. Okay, so we need several things set here. We need the private token, the private access token for the repository so that the deployment script will be able to fetch the repository archive. We need the value for the webhook token set so that the application can verify that the request came from GitLab. So we need to fill both of those in. So I'm going to set the private token first. So that is the access token. And then we need the webhook token. So that's for the project. And so I can go back and get that. I forget exactly what I set it to. So if I'm onto the project settings and webhooks, and here it is here. I'll just click on the edit button so I can get the token for the webhook. Okay, there it is. So the private token, so the deploy script can fetch the project archive. The webhook token, so that the application can verify that the request came appropriately from GitLab. We're going to set the port to be 8080 as before. We're going to debug the application as before and start the application. So let us do that, and fingers crossed everything is working. Let me just do a PM2 status one more time. It seems to be working, and let's do a PM2 logs. And everything looks good there. So the application was just restarted and listening on port 8080. So if I go to the application page, and fingers crossed, I'll do a refresh here, and hopefully, yeah, we get log entries there for that request. Okay, so now the big test. So there's a lot of pieces there that have to come together. So now the big test is to see that when we make a change to the application and push that to the GitLab repository, that automatically gets deployed. So in order to do that, I am going to open up the editor. I am going to make a change. So in roots index. So now we have the title express123. I'm just going to add to that. Hope this works. And I'm going to open, so I've got this one terminal still logged into the virtual machine there. I am going to open a new terminal window here. And I'm going to go into my app and do a git status. Okay, so I've modified that one file. So I am going to add and commit that simultaneously. So git commit -a for add, -m for message, and I'm going to test the deploy script. So that's the commit. And then we'll push it. Git push and there we go. And now the moment of truth here. If I go back to the other terminal where I'm logged in, and looks like there was an error there. So it did. We got the post for the webhook, and so I'm just going to go back and see what the error was. Oh, 404 not found. That's interesting. Well, let's go to. I do a refresh on the webhooks page in GitLab. We can view the details. Got a 404 not found. So that is interesting. Oh. So there's the problem there. Copy and paste error, not uncommon. This should be for web hook router. And I think what I am going to have to do is I'm going to push the change, but unfortunately, since the current running application on the virtual machine is broken, it's not going to work manually, so I will have to do it by hand one more time. So let us push the change. So do git status and commit. So I made that change in app.js and a push. There we go. And yeah, so we got the post again. Now, I mean, this is a bit tricky. You would think, well, you just fixed it. Why is it still not working? But you've got to remember that what's running currently is the previous version, and it never got to load the corrected version. So I'm just going to stop the logger for the moment. I'm going to go back to my home directory, and let's tidy up the old stuff. So rm-r, the archive and the directory, and let's fetch it again. So there we go, and expand that or extract that. And do the copy again. So that, and reload the application. So PM2 status, PM2 reload, reload www. Okay, so we reloaded it by hand. Let's start up the logs one more time. And yep, so it just restarted. again. Okay, and let's try this one more time. So let me make another change to the index root and just say trying again. And git status. Okay, so and push. And then let's go back to this looks much better. So just for your information, so this is the log of the webhook object, and you can see it contains all sorts of information about the project, the ID, the name, the path with the namespace, and so on, all that information. So that was the post operation. And if you remember correctly, let's just bring it back up here. What we had happen in that route was restarting, ultimately spawning this script to restart the application. So again, there's the deploy application. And at the end of all that, we do a reload. So what we are seeing here in the logs is we got that post message. The process was spawned to fetch the application and reload the application, and these are the log messages corresponding to the reload. So it was stopped and then restarted immediately, and then we get the log message that it's up and listening again on port 8080. And so fingers crossed, if we refresh the page now, we get the modified application. And so I know that was a lot of effort to set up, but the main benefit at this point is we can just make changes in our development environment, be that Google Cloud Shell or what have you, and push those changes, and then they will automatically get deployed to the production version of the application. So that's a really, really simple implementation of continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So we've embedded it right inside the application. So that's the principle of continuous deployment. So I hope you found that helpful.